So here's a question for you. Is the church growing or declining? Most people in the church think that it's shrinking, but actually that's not true at all. In fact, the church is growing, and it has grown relentlessly since Jesus rose from the dead. You've probably heard people talk about how Christianity in America is in decline, but that statement is actually very misleading. Even the church in America is growing. When people say it's declining, they aren't technically lying, because what they're saying is that the percentage of churchgoers to non-churchgoers is declining. It's just not growing as fast as the general population is growing. And that's not great news. David Kinnaman attributes this struggle to Christianity in America's image problem. In fact, the perception of Christians in some circles is so bad that simply carrying the Christian brand labels a person irrelevant or even an extremist. Many Americans have a negative view of Christians, often because Christians are seen as negative people. We as the church need to admit we don't look that good. When others see us, they're not all that attracted to us, and they wonder why we don't make some changes. Americans are pessimistic about the current state of the nation, and 46% say that religion is part of the problem. In other words, Christians have been ruled out by many when it comes to finding solutions to the nation's problems. Many of those outside Christianity, especially younger adults, don't trust Christians, and they don't want to be like us. So when people are around Christians, their emotional and intellectual barriers go up, and they end up rejecting Jesus because they feel rejected by Christians. Considering the fact that our calling is to actively engage the ideas of culture in order to win them to Christ, like Paul did on Mars Hill, the church has to quit attacking them and try to understand their perspectives. Pessimism about the likelihood of influencing a change in a person's life, or cynicism about that person's desire to discover truth, causes us to attack pre-Christians rather than love them. The main reason outsiders feel hostile towards conservative Christians is our swagger. We're known for what we stand against, not for what we stand for. And the church's cynical attitude about the behavior of pre-Christians makes us sound judgmental. The three most common perceptions of present-day Christianity are anti-homosexual. That's an image held by 91% of young outsiders. Judgmental, so that's 87% of people believe that. And hypocritical, 85%. And on top of that, a majority of outsiders say that we are old-fashioned, too involved in politics, out of touch with reality, insensitive to others, boring, not accepting of other faiths, and confusing. Why are we seen as a negative organization when our leader was such a positive person? And why are we seen as judgmental when our leader spent so much time hanging out with sinners? So, if the first thing that pre-Christians think about when they think about Christians is anti-homosexual, then we have to have a good way of addressing that conversation. The homosexual conversation is of primary importance to the youngest generations. And the homophobic language of many Christians and the delayed response to the LGBTQ questions by others have caused divisions within the church and between the church and pre-Christians. Too often, same-sex attraction and gay sex have been lumped together into one thing. Same-sex attraction has been treated as a sin rather than a cause of compassion and an opportunity for discipleship. And that has to change. And we have to learn how to have better conversations about this topic. I think the most convincing proof that we have a problem is that our own kids have these same perceptions of us. Half of young churchgoers describe their church as judgmental, as too involved in politics, as hypocritical, and as confusing. Nearly 1/3 of Christian young people believe our faith is old-fashioned and out of touch with reality. They think this way because we've overemphasized truth instead of balancing grace and truth the way Jesus did. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Young pre-Christians are looking for Christians who live their lives with the gracious fruits of the Spirit, not Christians who judge outsiders. It's time for the church to stop defending its way of communicating the gospel message and accept that it has earned its negative perceptions. A generation of young Christians believe the churches that they were raised in aren't hospitable, not a place to raise doubts that they have. And if that's the case, why would they trust the church to treat pre-Christians with hospitality? They've heard the cliche talking heads of the older generations to their honest questions. They've heard the hostile statements the church makes about millennials and Generation Z. The good news is that although young Christians may be ashamed of the reputation of the church, they are not ashamed of Jesus. I think a quality rebranding of the church would bring incredible energy to the church. It would help the church reach young pre-Christians, re-engage with young people who have left the church, and keep the young believers that it has. There are thousands of Christian young people in America who want nothing more than to elevate the relevance of Jesus in our culture, but they don't trust the church to make it happen. And consider this: 88% of adults say their faith is important to them, but most chose not to grow their faith in a church recently. And when you consider the importance of the church to churchgoers, 64% of people in the United States are open to pursuing their faith in an environment that is different from the typical church. And that's what's happening. So it's true that overall church participation rates are declining in America. But it appears that the decline in church attendance is actually due to the fact that most of the people who used to call themselves moderately religious are leaving the church. Lukewarm Christians are leaving the church. The people who used to claim no strong church affiliation on the surveys have started to claim no church affiliation at all on surveys. And amazingly, the percent of people who claim strong affiliation with the church has actually increased pretty steadily over the past 35 years. The moderate church is disappearing, but that's not terrible news. And people are more honest about their commitment to Christianity because they recognize what that means. And when people are honest about that, we can be more effective in getting people to actually dedicate themselves to the church instead of using it as a social activity.